Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud for well over a decade, and in that time he has encountered every kind of contestant imaginable. He has met doctors and teachers, farmers and firefighters, comedians and clergy, people from every walk of life and every corner of America. But on a bright afternoon in February 2025, something happened that stopped the entire production in its tracks. The cameras kept rolling, but the game itself came to a complete halt as Steve Harvey, the producers, and every single person in that studio audience tried to process what they had just learned. A 96-year-old great-grandmother named Rosemary Chen from San Francisco, California, had just revealed her true identity, and what she shared would rewrite history, shock the nation, and remind everyone watching that heroes do not always look the way we expect them to. If this story moves you the way it moved everyone who witnessed it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another incredible Family Feud moment. The Chen family had traveled from San Francisco to compete on Family Feud, and from the moment they walked onto that stage, something felt different. There were 5 of them standing in a row, 4 generations of one remarkable family, but every eye in the studio was drawn to the tiny woman at the front of the line. Rosemary Chen stood barely 4 feet 11 inches tall, her silver hair styled in an elegant twist, her posture perfect despite her 96 years. She wore a beautiful emerald green silk dress with delicate gold embroidery, a jade pendant around her neck that seemed to glow under the studio lights, and she walked without any assistance, her steps slow but steady and sure. Her face was a map of nearly a century of life, lined with wrinkles that seemed to tell stories of their own, but her eyes were what caught everyone's attention. They were sharp and bright, holding a depth of experience and a spark of something that suggested this woman had seen things most people could not imagine. Behind Rosemary stood her daughter Linda, 72, a retired pediatrician who had spent her career caring for children in underserved communities. Next to Linda was her son Michael, 49, an aerospace engineer who had worked on projects for NASA. Beside Michael stood his wife Jennifer and their daughter Emily, who at 24 was the youngest member of the Chen family team, and a medical student following in her great-great-grandmother's footsteps. 4 generations of Chens, all gathered on that stage because Emily had discovered something in her family's history that she believed the world needed to know. Steve Harvey approached the family with his characteristic warmth, immediately drawn to the elderly woman at the front of the line. There was something about Rosemary Chen that commanded attention without demanding it, a quiet authority that seemed to fill the space around her. Steve took her hand gently, and when Rosemary looked up at him, she smiled, a smile that was both warm and knowing, as if she could see right through him to the heart underneath. "Now, who do we have here?" Steve asked, his voice softening the way it always did when he encountered elderly contestants. "My name is Rosemary Chen, Mr. Harvey. I am 96 years old, and I am very pleased to meet you." Her English was perfect, carrying only the faintest trace of an accent that hinted at origins far from California. Steve Harvey was immediately charmed. 96 years old! That is incredible, Mrs. Chen. You look absolutely beautiful. Now tell me, what did you do for a living? Rosemary's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a shadow of something passing behind those bright eyes. "I was a nurse, Mr. Harvey. I worked as a nurse for many years." Steve nodded appreciatively. "A nurse. That is noble work. How many years did you work as a nurse?" Rosemary paused for just a moment before answering. I started in 1945, Mr. Harvey, in China. I worked as a nurse during the war, and then I came to America and continued nursing here until I retired in 1989. The audience applauded politely, respecting her years of service, but they had no idea that Rosemary Chen's nursing career was just the surface of a much deeper story. What the audience did not know yet was that Rosemary Chen had a secret she had kept for 80 years. A secret that her own children had not known until very recently. A secret that her great-great-granddaughter Emily had discovered while researching their family history for a school project. What Emily found in old records, faded photographs, and declassified documents had shocked the entire family and set in motion the events that led to this moment on the Family Feud stage. The game itself was competitive and entertaining. The Chen family faced off against the Rodriguez family from Texas, and both teams brought their energy and enthusiasm to every round. But it was Rosemary who consistently stole the show. Despite her age, her mind was incredibly sharp, her answers coming quick and often landing at the top of the board. When asked to name something a doctor might tell you to do more of, Rosemary said rest and hit the number one answer. When asked what makes a person truly brave, she said doing what is right even when you are afraid. And while it was not the top answer, Steve Harvey stopped the game just to acknowledge the wisdom of her response. "Mrs. Chen," Steve said, looking at her with genuine admiration, "that might be the best answer I have ever heard on this show, survey or no survey. Where does that kind of wisdom come from?" Rosemary smiled that knowing smile again. "It comes from living, Mr. Harvey. It comes from making hard choices and living with the consequences. It comes from understanding that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something matters more than fear." The Chen family won the main game, and the decision was made that Rosemary and her great-great-granddaughter Emily would play Fast Money together. It was a beautiful pairing, the oldest and youngest members of the family, representing 4 generations of Chens and nearly a century of history between them. As Rosemary made her way to the Fast Money podium, the audience gave her a standing ovation. She accepted it with grace and humility, bowing slightly in acknowledgement. Steve approached Rosemary with a gentleness that everyone noticed. "All right, Mrs. Chen, this is Fast Money. You know how it works. 5 questions, 20 seconds. Just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?" Rosemary nodded, her small hands resting on the podium. "I am ready, Mr. Harvey. I have faced harder things than this." Something in her voice made Steve pause. There was a weight to those words that suggested they meant more than they seemed. But the game had to continue. So Steve launched into the questions as the timer appeared on the screen. "Name something a hero might do." Rosemary answered immediately. "Save lives." Steve continued. "Name a place where people seek safety." "A shelter." "How many people can one person save?" "As many as possible." "Name something worth risking your life for." "Other people's children." "Name something that should never be forgotten." Rosemary paused for just a heartbeat, her eyes growing distant. "The truth." The buzzer sounded, and the studio fell into a contemplative silence. There was something about Rosemary's answers that felt different from typical Fast Money responses. They were not just answers. They felt like pieces of a larger story trying to break through. Emily took her position in the soundproof booth, and Rosemary's answers were revealed one by one. Save lives as something a hero might do was the number one answer with 45 points. A shelter as a place where people seek safety earned 32 points. As many as possible for how many people one person can save was not on the board, but Steve Harvey paused to acknowledge it anyway. Other people's children as something worth risking your life for was on the board with 21 points. And the truth as something that should never be forgotten was the number 2 answer with 28 points. Emily completed her round successfully, and the Chen family had won $20,000. The celebration was warm but subdued, as if everyone sensed that something more important was about to happen. Steve Harvey approached Rosemary, who was still standing at the podium, her hands folded in front of her. "Mrs. Chen, I have to say something. Your answers in that round were different. They felt like they meant something more than just a game show. Other people's children as something worth risking your life for. That is a very specific answer." Steve paused, studying her face. "Is there something you would like to share with us?" Rosemary looked at Steve Harvey for a long moment, then turned to look at her family. Linda was nodding encouragingly, tears already forming in her eyes. Michael had his arm around his daughter, Emily, who was watching her great-great-grandmother with an expression of profound love and respect. Rosemary turned back to Steve and took a deep breath. "Mr. Harvey, I have kept a secret for 80 years. My family only learned the truth 6 months ago, when my great-great-granddaughter Emily found documents that I thought had been lost forever. I came on this show today because I'm 96 years old, and I do not have much time left. Before I die, I want the world to know who I really was, who I really am." The studio fell absolutely silent. Steve Harvey did not move, did not speak, just waited with complete attention. Rosemary reached up and touched the jade pendant around her neck. This pendant was given to me by a woman named Margaret Huang in Shanghai in 1943. Margaret was a missionary from America who ran an orphanage in the international settlement. When the Japanese occupation made things too dangerous, Margaret had to evacuate the American missionaries. But there were over 200 Chinese children in that orphanage who had nowhere to go. Children whose parents had been killed in the war. Children who would be taken by the Japanese and sent to labor camps, or worse. The audience was completely still, sensing that something monumental was about to be revealed. Margaret gave me this pendant and asked me to take care of the children. I was 16 years old. Rosemary's voice was steady despite the magnitude of what she was sharing. For the next 2 years, from 1943 to 1945, I hid those 200 children. I moved them from safe house to safe house. I smuggled them out of Shanghai when the danger became too great. I led them through the countryside, sometimes walking for days, sometimes hiding in barns and abandoned buildings. I did it whatever it took to keep them alive. Steve Harvey's mouth had fallen open. The audience was frozen in shock. The Japanese were looking for me. They called me the ghost nurse because I would appear in a village, help people, and disappear before they could catch me. I used my nursing skills to treat wounded Chinese soldiers, sick children, anyone who needed help. I stole medicine from Japanese supply depots. I forged documents to move the children through checkpoints. I did things that would have gotten me executed if I had been caught. Rosemary paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of 8 decades of silence. By the end of the war, I had helped save 847 people, not just the original 200 children, but hundreds of others along the way. Wounded soldiers, families fleeing the violence, prisoners who escaped from Japanese labor camps. I kept count because I wanted to remember each one. 847 lives. The gasp that swept through the audience was followed by a stunned silence that seemed to echo off the walls. Steve Harvey had taken a step backward, his hand pressed against his chest, his face a mask of disbelief and overwhelming emotion. "Mrs. Chen," Steve finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "you saved 847 people during World War II, and you never told anyone?" Rosemary shook her head slowly. "When I came to America in 1948, I wanted to leave the war behind. I wanted to be a normal person, have a normal life. I married my husband David, raised my children, worked as a nurse at San Francisco General Hospital for 40 years. I never talked about the war. My husband knew some of it, but not all. My children knew nothing until Emily found the records." Emily stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "I was doing research on our family history for a graduate school project. I found declassified records from the war, testimony from survivors, photographs from the liberation. My great-great-grandmother's face was in dozens of them. Survivors had been trying to find her for decades. They called her the Angel of Shanghai. But no one knew what happened to her after the war. No one knew she had come to America and changed her name and lived a quiet life in San Francisco. The production had come to a complete halt. Cameras were still rolling, but no one was paying attention to the game anymore. Producers were speaking urgently into their headsets. Audience members were crying, hugging strangers, some kneeling in prayer. Steve Harvey walked over to Rosemary and did something that surprised everyone. He bowed to her, a deep bow of respect and reverence. "Mrs. Chen, I have met a lot of people in my life. Famous people, powerful people, wealthy people, but I have never met anyone like you. You saved 847 lives, and then just went on living like it was nothing special. You spent 80 years being humble when you could have been celebrated as one of the greatest heroes of the 20th century." Rosemary reached out and touched Steve's face gently, like a grandmother comforting a grandchild. "Mr. Harvey, I did not do it for celebration. I did it because it was right. Those were children, Mr. Harvey, children who had no one else. How could I walk away from them? How could anyone?" Steve straightened up, wiping his eyes. "But 80 years? 80 years of silence. Why did you never tell anyone?" Rosemary's expression grew thoughtful. "Because I was afraid, Mr. Harvey. Not during the war, when I should have been afraid, but after. I was afraid that if people knew what I had done, they would expect me to be something I did not feel I was. They would expect me to be brave all the time, to be strong all the time, to be special. But I was just a girl who did what needed to be done. I was just a nurse who could not look away from suffering. I was not special. I was just there." Steve Harvey shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am. With all due respect, that is where you are wrong. Being there is exactly what makes you special. Anyone can talk about doing the right thing. You actually did it. For 2 years, under constant threat of death, you did the right thing over and over again, 847 times. What happened next would be replayed countless times in the days, weeks, and months that followed." Steve Harvey turned to the cameras and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to stop this show right now. What we have just learned changes everything. This woman standing before us is not just a contestant on Family Feud. She is a hero of World War II. She saved 847 lives and never asked for anything in return. She has lived among us for almost 80 years, working as a nurse, raising a family, being a grandmother and great-grandmother and great-great-grandmother, and none of us knew the giant we had in our midst." Steve turned back to Rosemary, his voice thick with emotion. "Mrs. Chen, Family Feud is going to do something we have never done before. We are going to find as many of those 847 people as we can. The children you saved would be in their 80s and 90s now, if they are still alive. Their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, they deserve to know who saved their family. They deserve to thank you. And you deserve to know what became of the lives you saved. Rosemary's composure finally broke. Tears began to fall down her weathered cheeks as she shook her head. "Mr. Harvey, that is not necessary. I did not do it for thanks." Steve took her hands gently. "I know you did not, Mrs. Chen. That is exactly why you deserve it." When the episode aired 3 weeks later, the response was nothing short of phenomenal. The clip of Rosemary's revelation broke the internet within hours, viewed over 1 billion times across every platform. News networks around the world covered the story. Historians who had spent decades researching the Angel of Shanghai could not believe that she had been living quietly in San Francisco the entire time. The Chinese government issued an official statement honoring Rosemary's bravery. The United States Congress began proceedings to award her a Congressional Gold Medal, but the most incredible response came from the families of those 847 people Rosemary had saved. Within days of the episode airing, Family Feud's offices were flooded with messages. Children of the children Rosemary had saved, now in their 60s and 70s, reached out from all over the world. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had grown up hearing stories about the Angel of Shanghai were stunned to discover she was real, she was alive, and she was living in San Francisco. The descendants numbered in the thousands, spread across every continent, connected by a single thread, a 16-year-old girl who had refused to let them die. The reunion was held 6 weeks later at a convention center in San Francisco. Rosemary, now growing frail at 96, was brought in on a wheelchair, though she insisted on standing to greet each family personally. What happened over the next 8 hours would go down in history as one of the most emotional reunions ever documented. One by one, the families came forward. An 87-year-old man named Wei, who had been 4 years old when Rosemary carried him through the mountains. A 79-year-old woman named Mei Ling, who had been 8 when Rosemary found her hiding in the ruins of her bombed home, and added her to the group of children she was protecting. A 72-year-old doctor named James, whose mother had been one of the orphans, and who had spent his entire career in medicine, inspired by stories of the angel who saved his mother's life. But it was not just the original survivors who came. It was their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Thousands of people whose very existence could be traced back to the courage of one teenage girl. 80 years ago, they brought photographs and letters and family trees showing generation after generation that would not exist if Rosemary Chen had looked the other way. When it was calculated, the number was staggering. Those 847 people Rosemary saved had gone on to have families, and those families had had families. The direct descendants now numbered over 12,000 people. 12,000 lives that existed because of one girl's courage. Steve Harvey was there for the reunion, and when the number was announced, he broke down completely. He had to leave the stage for several minutes to compose himself. When he returned, he addressed the crowd with tears still streaming down his face. 12,000 people. Do you understand what that means? Every doctor, every teacher, every mother and father, every child in this room exists because of this woman. Every act of kindness you have ever done, every life you have ever touched, every person you have ever loved. It all traces back to a 16-year-old girl who decided that 200 orphans were worth risking her life for. Steve turned to Rosemary, who was sitting in her wheelchair surrounded by her own family and hundreds of the families she had created through her courage. "Mrs. Chen, you said you were not special. You said you were just there. But look around this room. Look at what just being there created. 12,000 lives, 12,000 stories, and those 12,000 people will go on to have children and grandchildren of their own. 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, people will be alive because of what you did in 1943. Rosemary looked around the room at the sea of faces that represented her hidden legacy. And for the first time in 80 years, she allowed herself to understand the magnitude of what she had done. Her small body began to shake with sobs as the weight of it finally settled on her shoulders. Not the weight of burden, but the weight of meaning, of purpose, of a life that had mattered beyond anything she had allowed herself to believe. "My children," she whispered, and though her voice was soft, the microphones picked it up and broadcast it to every corner of the room. "My children, I have carried you in my heart for 80 years. I have dreamed about you. I have prayed for you. I never knew what happened to you, where you went, who you became. And now I know. Now I can see. You became everything. You became teachers and doctors and parents and grandparents. You became good people who built good lives. That is all I ever wanted for you. That is all I ever prayed for." The room fell silent as Rosemary continued, her voice growing stronger despite her tears. "I was afraid for so long. Afraid to tell my story because I did not want to be seen as a hero. I was just a girl who loved children and could not bear to see them suffer. But I understand now. I understand that being a hero is not about being special. It is about showing up. It is about doing what needs to be done when no one else will do it. It is about saying these children matter when the whole world is trying to destroy them." She looked directly at her great-great-granddaughter Emily, who was kneeling beside her wheelchair, holding her hand. "Emily, you found my story when I had buried it. You brought it into the light when I was afraid. Thank you for being brave when I could not be. Thank you for making sure these families finally know each other. That was worth more than any medal or recognition. These families being here together, knowing they are connected, knowing they are part of something bigger than themselves, that is the real reward." The months that followed were filled with honors and recognition that Rosemary accepted with her characteristic humility. The Congressional Gold Medal was awarded in a ceremony attended by the President. China invited her for a state visit, though her health prevented her from making the journey. A documentary was filmed about her life, featuring testimonies from dozens of survivors and their descendants. Schools and hospitals were named after her. The Angel of Shanghai was finally known to the world. But for Rosemary, the greatest gift was simpler. Every week she would receive letters and photographs from the families she had saved. Babies being born, graduations, weddings, accomplishments great and small. Each one was evidence that her choice 80 years ago continued to ripple through time, creating love and life in an unbroken chain. Steve Harvey visited her regularly, bringing flowers and sitting with her for hours, listening to stories about the war, about the children, about the long, quiet decades that followed. In one of their final conversations, he asked her what she wanted people to remember about her story. Rosemary thought for a long moment before answering. I want them to remember that they can be brave too. I was not born special, Mr. Harvey. I was a scared 16-year-old girl who did not know what she was doing. But I knew right from wrong. I knew that children deserve to live. I knew that silence in the face of evil is its own kind of evil. So I acted, not because I was brave, but because I could not live with myself if I did not. She paused, her eyes growing distant with memory. There are always children who need saving, Mr. Harvey. Not always from war, but from poverty, from neglect, from loneliness, from despair. You do not have to cross mountains or hide from soldiers to be a hero. You just have to see the children who need help and refuse to look away. That is all I did. I refused to look away. Rosemary Chen passed away peacefully 3 months after the reunion, at the age of 97. She died surrounded by 4 generations of her own family and dozens of the descendants of those she had saved 80 years before. Her final words, according to her great-great-granddaughter Emily, were, "I can see them, all my children. They are waiting for me." The funeral was attended by thousands. Survivors who had made the journey from around the world, descendants who wanted to pay their respects to the woman who had made their existence possible, dignitaries and officials who wanted to honor a true hero, and ordinary people who had heard her story and been moved to come to witness the end of an extraordinary life. Steve Harvey delivered one of the eulogies. His voice broke multiple times as he spoke about the tiny woman who had changed his understanding of what courage really means. Rosemary Chen lived 2 lives, Steve said. The first life was the one we all saw. A nurse, a wife, a mother, a grandmother. An ordinary woman living an ordinary life in San Francisco. The second life was the one she hid for 80 years. A hero, a savior, an angel who walked through fire to protect the innocent. Both lives were real. Both lives were true. And both lives teach us the same lesson. That heroism is not about superpowers or special abilities. It is about showing up. It is about refusing to look away. It is about deciding that other people's children matter as much as your own. He paused, looking out at the thousands of faces before him. Rosemary saved 847 lives, which became 12,000 lives, which will become hundreds of thousands of lives across the generations. That is her legacy. But I believe she would want her legacy to be something more than numbers. I believe she would want us to remember that we all have the capacity to be heroes. We all encounter moments when we can choose to act or look away. Rosemary chose to act, and because she did, all of you are here today. Steve looked at the photograph of Rosemary that stood beside her casket, that same knowing smile on her face. Rest well, Mrs. Chen. You have earned it, and thank you. Thank you for showing us what one person can do when they refuse to let fear win. Thank you for saving all those children, and thank you for finally trusting us with your story. The story of Rosemary Chen reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and uncelebrated. They are the nurses and teachers, the volunteers and caregivers, the ordinary people who do extraordinary things when no one is watching. Rosemary hid her heroism for 80 years because she did not think it was anything special. She was wrong. It was the most special thing imaginable. And by finally sharing her truth, she gave us all permission to believe that we too could be brave when bravery is needed. If Rosemary's story touched your heart, if it made you think about the hidden heroes in your own life, if it inspired you to show up for someone who needs you, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember Rosemary's words. You do not have to be special to be a hero. You just have to refuse to look away. This was the story of Rosemary Chen, the angel of Shanghai, the woman who saved 847 lives and kept it secret for 80 years. And it is proof that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones we never know about, the ones who do the right thing simply because it is right, and then go on living their quiet lives, carrying their extraordinary secrets in their humble hearts. 12,000 people and counting. That is the legacy of one teenage girl who refused to look away. What will your legacy be?